Hello. I'll put my water here and I hope I don't break anything. Let's hope. So, thank you guys. I want to start by thanking Fujifilm and B&H for bringing me here today. It's a great honor to spend some time with you guys and sharing some of my work. I'm here along with Alexandra Jacobs, and she's one of the dancers that I work with regularly. You can go back to warming up. I just wanted to introduce you. We're going to talk a little bit more with her in a short while. But once again, thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself and my work, in case you've never seen my work before. I currently am working on this series with dance photography and dance mostly in the streets, mostly outdoors. And I've had the chance of traveling recently with the series, and I've met a particular number of dancers around the world, mostly this side of the world, I guess. But yes, so that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get specifically into the dance photography, I would like to give you a little bit of background of me as a photographer and the journey that took me to do this kind of work that I do today. So before I got into photography, I was actually, growing up, I loved telling stories, and my stories were very visual when I was growing up. My family hated it because I took the task of entertaining all of our family guests with very, 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 very bad jokes, not very funny many of the times. But what was interesting to me was the ability or the possibility of entertaining people, and my stories were always very visual. So fast forward to when I went to college, I actually studied mime theater, and I studied with I'm pretty sure a lot of you know Marcelo Marceau. So he was my teacher, and I studied under his tutelage for 2 years. And I found in mime theater a very interesting way of telling stories without the necessity of telling words, of using words. So it was a language that is very primal to all of us because we all answer to visual cues. We all answer to physical or nonverbal language in our day-to-day basis. So mime became a very stylized way of transmitting or telling these stories, sometimes fictional, sometimes not, but it's very interesting to me because it was very primal and very natural to all of us from a reception point of view. So fast forward a few years later, I discovered photography. And yet again in photography, I found another way of telling stories without the necessity of words. And I am someone that, Marceau used to say a joke, he would tell, don't get a mime talking because he will never shut up. And by nature, I'm someone that likes to speak a lot, surprisingly being a mime, right? So I have this intrinsic nature to communicate. And photography became, as well as mime, a way of telling stories without the necessity of language, of being able to communicate with an audience without the necessity of knowing any other language, because it's a purely visual form of communication. Now, the interesting thing about photography versus mime, and the reason why I started doing more photography than mime, was that with photography I could preserve those stories longer, as opposed to when I was doing mime, the curtain would fall and then that was the end of the story, right? Whereas in photography, you could tell a story, you can preserve it, and now with digital media, you can really, go ahead and share it and be closer to your audience, even if your audience is miles away. So I started doing photography in 2007, and I started working with a magazine in Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from, and I was doing mostly portraits for editorial stories. And later on, they started giving me more and more assignments into like political stuff, and then as well as fashion spreads. In 2011, I moved to Chicago, Illinois, and I started working with the Chicago Tribune, and with them, particularly with the Spanish publication called Hoy. And with them, I was covering culture, sports, community sports, arts and entertainment. So I was doing concerts and different things like that. Now, while this work was very interesting, it was work that I was being taught to do as a professional, I realized at some point that this work didn't really I didn't really have a personal connection to this work because it was all, I was being taught to do this, but it was not something that came from me. And while I was photographing people on a day-to-day basis, as a professional photographer, when it came to my personal work, I was really intimidated by the idea of photographing someone, because when people ask me like, well, why do you want this picture? And I was like, I don't know, because you look good, I guess. But so it was a real challenge to me if I was not on assignment to photograph someone. So I decided to just face that fear, and that's when I started doing street photography. And in street photography, I bring it up because it's something that still in the work that I do today, you will see, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later, it's a work that it's still really at the core and at the substance of the work that I do. Hello? So with street photography, I was putting myself in a very vulnerable place because I had to be in front of people, whether I liked it or not. I really had to be in front of the people, and it was a real challenge. But it really got me very comfortable little by little. And in the beginning, yes, I would shoot, maybe when people were not looking, maybe when they were looking away. But little by little, I started getting more comfortable, and as you can see in this picture, I was actually using flash, a little bit of like a Bruce Gilden inspiration, and I started getting much more comfortable, getting closer to people, and redefining that personal space when it comes to photographing subjects. Sometimes I guess I got too close. You be the judge. But what I really liked about doing street photography, it was this is the clicker, right? I guess, I don't know. Not much information. I guess I'll use this as a clicker. So what I really liked about street photography, it was the fact that I was being able to witness different stories, different moments in the streets that were happening, and if you don't pay attention, those moments can be very, very intimate. And in a day-to-day life, we don't really pay attention much to what's happening around us, right? But when you're doing this kind of work, you really, really have to become a radar. You really have to become, a radar. I don't find a better word for that. You have to be really, really attentive to things. And it really affected my personal life in many ways, when even sometimes I was not photographing, I found myself helping people in the street without necessarily, it's not something that I would normally do, but because I was in a state that I was always paying attention to what was around me, and to, intimate situations like this, I think I was being much more present everywhere I went. Now, another of the reasons why street photography has become a very particular part of my work is because, as I was mentioning, street photography puts you in a situation that you have to make decisions really fast. You have to be very attentive, not just to the people, but to your surroundings, to how the light is hitting your subjects, and different things like that. So doing street photography, basically every day I would come out in New York, and whenever I traveled, I would also go out and shoot. It really got me into a state of alert when it came to photography. So it's something that still, when I'm photographing dancers today, from an aesthetic point of view, also from a technical point of view, I'm really attentive to everything that's around me when I'm choosing, for example, my locations, etc. So now to get into the dance work itself, which is the work that we're here to talk about. This is basically the essence of it. Now, what's interesting about this work is that before this work was this, it was actually this. And that person that you see in the picture, that handsome shadow, it's me. So I started this work as a self-portrait project initially. One, because observing the things that I saw in the streets, I really thought that definitely New York City is a very interesting place visually, but in terms of street photography, you also observe behavior and how people walk around every day. And people walk in a very formatted way, and people are always like, I have pictures of people literally going in line. like in a line. It's like, what is this, jail? Basically, you know. And if you go, for example, one of my favorite places to photograph street photography here in New York, it's on 34th Street and 6th Avenue. 6th? No, 7th. Especially like around 4 p.m., there's people that are walking to you know where I'm saying. There's people that are working to the train station, to Penn Station, and it's like madness there. It's like, you know, like masses and masses of people. So there was something that I was thinking, I really want to break this. I really want to break this routine. So I started photographing myself in situations in the city, in places where I would break this routine by using myself as a, you know, levitating. Now, the reason why I mention this also is because as a photographer, as a self-taught photographer mostly, a lot of the learning process that I had as a photographer was taking pictures of myself. Even back when I was working for the magazine in the beginning, I would, you know, if I had an assignment of shooting, for example, a chef the next day, I would put myself in my kitchen and, you know, imagine the different scenarios of things that I could do. And I think that, you know, in terms of lighting, in terms of like posing and all those things, so that the next day when I was with the subject, I was much more comfortable because I already had like at least an arsenal of things. It's not that I was going to do exactly the picture that I thought of, but I had at least an arsenal of things that I could, you know, get in my, you know, there's the mind there. You know, get into the, you know, into the bag of tricks and pull out. So I believe self-portraiture is a great tool for every photographer that we can work on. So, however, shooting myself in the street presented two hassles. One was getting my gear stolen, of course, because I would have to like place the camera and then, you know, go to a corner and jump and jump and jump and then go back, and, you know, and then there's that, and then I also started getting old and kind of got in the way because it was really difficult to jump at some point. It's like, I think it was like at 27, it was like, okay, 28, harder, 30, oh, no, I can't. So I decided to start it like, basically I say outsourcing this work to more able and, you know, better looking bodies than my own. And I swear that at some point in my life I could do this. Not anymore. But basically what I started to do with the dancers, I started to take from the aesthetic that I was already have been working as a street photographer and the things that I saw in New York City that are very particular to New York, and I started placing the dancers in those situations. Sometimes rather dangerous, but we can talk about that later. And basically I would place the dancers in the same places that I would see before my street photography subjects, right? So for example, on the photo on the right, crosswalks and like curves are a fascination to me because they're like a symbol of a beginning or an ending. You know, it's a start of something. Even when I'm doing street photography, and here's a trick for the street photographers, I stand just at curbs and, you know, like where the crosswalk is, because people are coming in. Most of the time they're in a hurry because they're crossing, so they're not really going to stop, because if they stop in the middle of the street because you're taking a picture, you know, they can get run over, so they just keep walking. And that's a place that I usually shoot at. But you know, like I would have my subjects normally there, so in this case, you know, I would place the dancer instead there. And what I realized little by little, it was that placing the dancer, who has a very stylized, a very ethereal kind of nature, against a background that is very rough and very rugged, it was creating for a very interesting language and a very interesting aesthetic. At the same time, I was putting the dancers in situations where we all are every day. And again, I was imagining a new reality, because sometimes, you know, I think we all, at least I know I'm at the, you know, I guess we don't make lines at the bank anymore because everything is digital and mobile, right? But, you know, in the everyday situations, I sometimes want to like break out and do something. You know, I just want to break out of like that mold. So putting the dancers in this situation, it's like a lot of people, when they look at my photograph, they're like, they feel that sense of freedom of like a new possibility, even if they cannot physically do that. most people, because this is something I swear I was never able to do, for sure, not at all. So little by little, once I developed this series in New York City, I started traveling with it more, and wherever I would go, I would try to find different dancers to photograph. Now, what I really liked about this was that I was not just featuring the city sites, but I was also featuring the culture through the dancers, featuring more of a human element. That it's definitely something that I'm passionate about. So these are different dancers that I've shot. This is in Puerto Rico as well. And then last year, I had the chance of going to Guatemala with a group of photographers. And we were about 10 to 11 photographers, and we were brought in by the tourism board to promote Guatemala as a prime tourism spot in the world. And so I also went out there and had the chance to photograph some of the dancers over there. And again, Cholk is not just the beauty of the city, but also the beauty of its people. This is from my most recent trip to Cuba. The picture on the left, if you want to see it for a more prolonged time, it's at B&H on 33rd Street on the side. Anyways, a little bit of self-promotion right there. So I went to Cuba because a professor in Columbia University, she's a teacher of internet communication technologies, and she was bringing a group of students to do a research on what's the status of internet communication technologies in Cuba. And thanks to the Bessie Foundation, they were able to bring me in sort of as an experimental piece of how can social media affect Cuba right now. I have a pretty large following on Instagram, so the work that I was doing was not just going to be able to just portray the dancers and Cuba itself, but because of my following, the idea was to bring that to like a pretty large audience. And it was a very successful project. Once I came back, I posted the pictures on my Instagram during the time I was there as well. And then when I came back and I sat down, I did a blog post about it, and the blog post was picked up by Mashable, and afterwards it was picked up by the Huffington Post. And it was a very successful project in the sense that we were able to really bring a lot of light to the situation in Cuba and to the people of Cuba. And one of the things, again, that people and political ideologies aside, one of the things that people have mentioned about these pictures in Cuba is the fact that, perhaps in Cuba there's a particular economical situation that has not allowed the country itself to invest in infrastructure. But as you can see, they have definitely invested on their human element. The dancers in Cuba are, bar none, some of the best dancers in the world, in spite of their difficulties. Most of these guys, their salary is somewhere between $25 to $40 a month. So, when you're a dancer, you really need to eat, I think, so to keep your body strong and to be able to do that in this kind of situation, it's amazing how they really strive. And again, political situations aside, they're just amazing dancers. They're incredible. So now, to get a little bit more into the didactic side of the talk, I want to share with you a few things that I believe, if you're interested in doing dance photography and getting into dance photography, some of the things that you definitely need to know before even starting to photograph. And the first thing that for me is very important is you have to educate yourself in dance photography, in dance vocabulary. And there's different reasons for that. The first reason particularly is to help yourself. The greatest thing about dance technique is that it's very codified and it's basically universal. So all those poses, they have names, and the same name that they call it in New York or in the States, they will call it in South America, they will call it in Russia, they will call it all over the world. So if you educate yourself on that, you're going to be able to talk to the dancers from a peer-to-peer perspective in that sense. The other reason why it's very important that you do that, it's because Hey, Alexandra. Alexandra. Come over. So as I was saying, for example, and just to give you a different example of poses, if I ask Alexandra to do attitude devant, croisé. Yeah, exactly. So basically, attitude, it's when you have the dancer with the bent leg, either forward or backward. If I say devant, it's forward. If I say derrière, it's backwards, right? Now, if I say, for example, right where she is, if I say do it croisé, do attitude derrière croisé, there you go. Exactly. So basically, croisé means that they're closed. And if I say open, if I say effacé, it's open, so she would be changing. That's when she was this way, and then she turned this way. So that's one particular thing. The other particular reason why it's really important that you verse yourself in dance vocabulary, and this is where I will have Alexander talk a little bit more about it, it's because if you don't really know how these poses are supposed to look, you really run the danger of making your subjects look really bad. And I have seen publicity campaigns, professional campaigns of dancers that look horrible. And they catch, they publish those pictures with the dancer like in midair, and I don't know why it went through, but like their legs are somewhere, their hands are somewhere completely different, their faces look different, look weird. So it's very important as a photographer, no matter if you're doing dance or if you're doing any other kind of photography that is related to style, you verse yourself. And I'll have Alexandra talk a little bit about her experience working with different photographers.
Hi, everyone. So a large part of being a professional dancer, whether you're modern or ballet,
Thank you.
that you're judged primarily on every aspect physically on your body, like anything from the slightest hand movement with your fingers to your face, everything matters. So taking that into account, it's very important on the dance side that we look the way that we trained for so long. Like, it takes 10 years to achieve something as simple as arm carriage. And so it's important when you're collaborating with a photographer that they understand the positions. And a large thing is also just the connection. I'm lucky that, Omar has a background in theater and miming, because there's an artistry that is just as important as creating, a line or something. But everything matters. So back to placement and just timing, there's a large difference, if someone's catching you and your foot looks like this versus pointed. It's important when you're photographing a dancer to know, the line at its fullest moment. But it's also a give and take thing. I get inspired by Omar, and I think that vocabulary and just kind of like letting me play around and knowing what he's gonna shoot and just having confidence that, okay, like no matter what you do, like that this person is gonna submit a good shot to the world. I think as a dancer, you feel more comfortable that you can rely on the person that you're working with. And I have worked, with so many ranges. I have seen really bad pictures of myself, and it's kind of scary, but it's always nice knowing that someone can show you off in the best light, especially when you're showcasing your career, So.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. So, thank you. So on that same subject, then it is really important that you learn to direct. And this is very important again, because once you educate yourself in the dance vocabulary itself, you have to be able to ask the dancer specifically what you want. And this is very important. dancers are basically, and Alexandra will know that, and it's not an offense to dancers. Dancers are trained to follow, basically. They're told to do a choreography from A to C, in this many counts of the music, etc., right? So I've seen many photographers start in front of a dancer and go like, okay, so do something, and the dancer is like, what do I do? I don't know, do something. So it's like this, that's the scariest thing, because one, you're putting them on the spot, and second, they really see that you don't even know where to start. So that's why it's really, really, really important that you educate yourself in the dance, into the dance vocabulary, but also that you get a sense of what you want to see in the pictures. So even if it's, I usually say that my first 4 poses are usually disposable. I never really use those pictures. But I have to go through them. I start very clearly by telling the dancer, okay, let's just start with an arabesque, for example. And I have the dancer do an arabesque. And in a way, it's a time that I'm using to see more or less where they are technically, but at the same time, I'm giving them a point of start. So when I see that arabesque, then I say, okay, maybe she's not that great at an arabesque. Let's try something else, and different things. But that's why it's really great that you educate yourself in the dance vocabulary, but you also learn to direct and tell them what you want and where. And to that matter, you can find different visual references. I do have a background in mime and dance, but it was like 15 years ago, right? So, memory kind of fades. So when I started working exclusively with dancers, basically I just Googled stuff, and then I started developing myself a portfolio of different like mood boards in Pinterest, for example, of visual references that could be very useful to me. So when I'm working with dancers, I can always go to that, and sometimes I don't remember exactly something, so I can just like pull out my phone, take out the Pinterest board, and show like, hey, let's try this, for example. And that really helps you as well to know when does it really look the best, a photograph of a dancer, for example, a pose, if it's a attitude, like the leg is high and it's not low, etc. Be patient when you're shooting with the dancers. You have to definitely be patient. If you get, it's a process of a lot of repetition. So if you get angsty, you're gonna, pass that anxious energy to them, and then they're just gonna, it's just gonna flip, and you're gonna ruin your session before it even begins. And lastly, protect the dancer's tool. Their tool is their body. So what I like to do before every session is I start every session asking the dancers, just take some time, take 15, 20 minutes to just warm up. And that's the most important thing. And it's a time for them to get their body ready. There's something that we also don't know as non-dancers, is that they're used to working on wooden floors. So it's not the same thing of jumping and falling into the wood than jumping and falling into concrete. So they need that time to get their muscles, their joints ready before each shoot. But at the same time, it's a time that I use to develop a rapport with the dancer, and I start asking them, like, what are your expectations from the shoot? What are the best things that, what are you good at? What are you not so comfortable doing? And I also tell them what are my expectations for the shoot. So one of the things that people ask me frequently is how do I find my dancers? This is one of the questions that I get the most. And one of the things that I use when I'm traveling is, this one I don't use all that much, but it's a tool that some people I know use, and I call it the institutional approach. And it's basically just approach an institution, whether it is a dance school, whether it is a dance company, or a modeling agency, and you can approach them and say, hey, I'm coming to Colombia next month, I'm looking for dancers to work with, and that could be helpful. I don't use it all that much, but I have used it at times. I think what I feel more comfortable from my perspective is, going through the social media route. And basically, I approach people on social media, and I've become a professional social media stalker, basically. But it's easier because it's a more personal approach. And here are some of the tools that I use. For example, you look through a hashtag. So I don't know if you know a little bit about social media, but for example, on Instagram, when you publish a picture, you can put a hashtag. Basically, a hashtag is a way of linking your pictures to a certain list that gets created on the net little by little. So if you're going to, as I said, Colombia, you can do a hashtag search of Colombia ballet, for example, and most likely somebody has created that hashtag already, and there are already photos listed there. So you can go there, maybe find the pictures that have been posted under the hashtag, and then someone that posted a picture is most likely a dancer, or there's a dancer tagged in the picture. So you go there, and if you see what you like, then I personally, what I do is that then I approach the dancer, and I just send them a direct message, or I send them a comment on their pictures. Another way you can do is through geotags. So again, some of these dance schools or dance companies, people have created geotags for that. So you go under that and you find different places, and then on those places you can find the dancers. And the third one that I call is down the rabbit hole. And basically it's like once you find one person, then that, let's say you find a dancer, that dancer is going to have other dancers on their feed most likely. So you find those other dancers, and then you keep going and going until you find someone that you like. Or you found a group of people that you liked. And finally, another one that I use when I travel is friends of friends. So to give you an example, for Cuba, which was one of the most challenging places to find dancers because basically they don't have much internet communication over there. So I tried all the other different approaches, and it was like I was reaching out to people, but I was not getting any replies back. It's basically because they don't have connection in an everyday basis, so it's very, very difficult. So I used a combination of going to the friends of friends, and basically what I did is that I did found Cuban dancers in the States, and I asked them, hey, I'm going to Cuba, this is my work, and if you know any dancer over there that you think might be interested, can you reach out to them? And that way I at least found 3 or 4 dancers before I was in Cuba. And that was important, that is a very important thing for me to try to find people before I even get there, because once you get there, that's a little bit harder. So that's another approach. And one thing that is very important is when you approach people is to be very professional and be very specific about what you want. I've seen people just write on other people's pictures, hey, let's shoot. That's like, other than just disrespectful, is like not specific at all, right? And what I found that it's worked for me is that I created a hashtag for my series, and I just tell people, hey, my name is Omar Robles, I'm a photographer from New York City, I'm gonna be in Peru, for example, next month. I would like to photograph with you, and you can find my pictures under this hashtag to see more or less the kind of work that I want to do. And that gives the people a sense of your direction. So in the case, for example, when I was starting, that I didn't really have a portfolio of photographs with dancers, what I did is that I had that mood board that I talked to you about, and then I would just send them to the mood board and said, this is more or less what I'm looking for. This is more or less what I'm trying to do. And that gives people basically an idea of what you're looking for, and also that you're not a creep. So location scouting is another one of the questions that people ask me the most, is like, how do you find your locations? Basically, a lot of times I use social media geotags again, and that is a great way, to see how the places have already been photographed. So that gives you a starting point of maybe things that have been done, but also the potential of places that you've never gone to. And there's also different apps that you can use that tell you like where the sun is setting and at what time, etc. So that's a good tool to use as well. Pre-shoot walks, basically, for example, in Cuba, the first 4 days that I had when I got there, I just had time to basically go around and shoot. And I was not choosing specific places that I wanted to photograph the dancers at, but I was getting a notion of what the city was and what things looked like, so that when I was facing the dancers, I knew more or less the aesthetic already, and when I wanted to go. No, luck, not luck, patience. Patience. It's a little bit of both, actually. A lot of times when I go out shooting, I don't pre-choose where I'm going to go. I just have a notion of where I'm going to meet the dancer, and we start walking. And there's a lot of, because of my street photography background, I've gotten myself used to, like as I said, to be a radar and to really be paying attention to my surroundings. But at the same time, those surroundings are not always perfect. So you have to also be patient and know that, you just keep walking and you're going to find something, and don't get antsy about it. So finally, when you arch art shooting, you can sit down now so you're not standing all the time there. Thank you. So when you're out shooting, there's a few things that I want to share with you that they're definitely at your disposal when you're photographing people on the street. Whether it is dance or just portrait photography, there are things that are just at your disposal, basically free, that you can take advantage to enhance your pictures. And the first one is light. Obviously, as photographers, that's our main concern, how to paint with light. And people often ask me, like, how do you light your dancers? And I actually don't bring anything with me. I don't like carrying anything because most of the cases it's just me and the dancer. So I don't have time to set up artificial lights or anything, so it's just me. So for example, one of the things that I learned, particularly in New York City, is that the light bounces a lot off of buildings, and it creates these pockets of light. So when I'm shooting people, when I'm looking for those locations, that's something that I look for very often. I look for like these different pockets of light that I can use as a spotlight. So whether it's bouncing on the buildings, and sometimes it's the light coming in through the buildings that create, like buildings or columns, it creates these hallways of lights that you can really take advantage of. Again, I book my sessions at times that I know the light is going to be at its primest. So I try to book close to sunset, or the dancers love this one, close to sunrise. Because that's where the light is going to be the best. So if you want to see me shooting around the street in New York City, you're most likely going to see me between 6 and 7 a.m., most likely. And another form of lighting that you can just use when you're outside is just, it's available light, so it's just street lights, and it's something that I use very often. In both cases, for example, in the case on the left, I just placed the dancer a few feet from a street lamp that was there, and I was able to photograph her. And thanks to the gear that I use, that is Fujifilm, I can really shoot at high ISOs and come out with pictures that are pretty crisp. So, for example, the one on the left, or on your left, right? It's Alexandra, and that one is like 6400 ISO, and the one on the right is at 12,800 ISO. And if you get close to the picture, you'll see like it's crisp. It has like hardly any noise. So that's one of the reasons why I love really shooting with Fujifilm equipment, because it has like a very nice, excellent image quality. And then another lighting situation that you can really take advantage of is just overcast days. It's one of those. It's also the dancers love, and myself as well, because I don't have to wake up so early. You just take advantage of the light as it is, because it's very even and very very nice. Now, the other element that we can take advantage of when shooting outdoors is the weather. And on the overcast subject, like when you shoot in the rain, for example, you really create a very dramatic tone to the pictures, and just as well as shooting, on the snow, on snowfalls. And this one on the right was taken during Jonah, and the other one was taken close to Jonah as well, I think. And they're very, very difficult situations to shoot at, but if you see the pictures, they just come with a very dramatic sense. So be brave, I guess, and be bold, and go out there and take a chance in those situations. And again, thanks to the Fujifilm gear that I use, they're all weather sealed, so I can go out and have no fear to like getting my camera damaged, because it's weather sealed. I really hate fiddling with like those rain covers, because they're just a pain in the neck, and then the gear always gets wet anyways, because when you do this, it's wet already. So being able to shoot with, like, for example, the X Pro 2 and the 90 millimeter lens that are both weather sealed, then I just have my camera with me, and I don't have to care about anything. Now, going back to the posing and to versing yourself and educating yourself in dance vocabulary, this is one of the reasons why it's also very important. When you're in challenging situations like that, you really have to know what you want to ask of your dancer. You cannot be in the rain and then ask them what to do, because they're really most likely going to kill you. It's like, what I want to do is get out of the rain, so be fast. And because I've already have that vocabulary, then I can just, resource to posts. All right, try this, try this, try this. And we do it, fairly fast, especially like, for example, in the ones in here, it's like you really have to be fast. So if you have that vocabulary, it really, really helps in these situations. And again, waking up really early in the morning, this is, I think we shot this about 5 a.m. But it comes with a really dramatic sense. And lastly, the last element that is out there that you can use when you're photographing in the street is just the people. Even if you're shooting portraits, the people outside can really bring an interesting element. And you have to really be smart in how to choose that. Sometimes it can be unnerving when people get into the pictures, but other times it really creates for a very dramatic, or just the reaction that the natural reaction that people have, or sometimes it's not people, sometimes it's animals in the street. This was from Cuba, and for example, the dog was being very annoying. He was actually biting the dancer. But I was like, hold on just for a second, and then finally we got it. The dog just reacted to the dancer, and it was beautiful. Or sometimes things like this happen. This was with Alexandra, and she, that was like a particularly very uncomfortable pose. And Alexandra was there, and I was shooting, and then this woman just gets into my frame, and I'm like, wait, that's brilliant. So I asked her, please stay there. And then I just moved a little bit and framed it, and it came out with this. So you can really take advantage of things like that, where normally it would be very uncomfortable. In this case, for example, you have, again, going back to my street photography days, I was shooting and I saw the guy through the corner of the frame. I was like, this dude is going to do something, because I already saw him preparing. So I prepare and I snap the picture right at the moment. So again, that's why I recommend people, whatever type of photography you do, street photography is definitely something that can really help you, think on your feet. This one, for example, and you might recognize a familiar face there, is actually, I sort of manipulated this situation. It was not by accident. I saw Bill at the corner waiting. We were both waiting, the dancer and myself were waiting to take a frame, and I saw Bill and I told her, let's get really fast because most likely Bill is going to shoot. And he was on his bike, and when he saw us, he got off and then took his camera, and I was like, amazing. I usually normally get, I don't love when people are shooting what I'm shooting because it can be very annoying, but in this case it was Bill. I had to have him in my frame. And just a funny story in that sometimes people can really help you out in certain situations. So again, you have to really be attentive. I was shooting the other day in 8th Avenue, and I don't want to judge people, but I'm pretty sure he was a junkie. And he approaches us, and he starts looking at the camera, looking at the pictures, and he was making comments, but they were not bad comments. He was actually, complimenting the dancers and complimenting the work. So I was like, fine, stick around. And then a little bit afterwards, this photographer just goes behind me and starts taking the picture that I'm taking of the dancers. And again, that's the type of situation that I'm like, come on, dude. It's like, you just flat out stealing my work. And the dancers told me, and that's something that really bothers the dancers as well. Just so you know, it's not just it bothers me, it bothers the dancer as well, because I'm going to take the responsibility when I post those pictures to give credit to the dancer. But this random dude that, shot what he saw in the street, they're not really going to credit the dancer. And maybe they're going to post a bad picture of the dancer, or maybe, even if they post a good picture of the dancer, nobody's really ever going to know who that dancer is. So I turn around to the guy and I say, hey, buddy, if you don't mind, and I'm taking a picture, can you just not do that? And he starts arguing with me, this is a street and I can't do it, this is a free country. It's like, yes, I understand, I'm a street photographer myself. I know that you can, but I'm asking you, please don't. And he keeps arguing, and suddenly the junkie goes, he said you have to move. It's like, he doesn't know where to go. He ran, and I didn't even see him afterwards. It's like, whoa. So again, not all people that are in the street, you have to choose, right, your battles. And in a lot of occasions, choosing your battles can pay off. This is, for example, in Cuba. And again, I was shooting the dancer, and the woman just comes into my frame, and I was thinking that she was going to cross, but she was standing, so it took me like a few seconds to say, all right, I can use this. So I backed up, and then I took, because I was just seeing part of the woman, I wasn't seeing her herself. When I took the camera out, and I was like, oh, wow, like she was just staring. She was not even moving. She was just like mesmerized by the dancer. So I thought, I'm totally gonna use this. So I ran back and I just like framed her. And you know, this picture is one of my favorite from the trip because again, it shows a lot of history of, you know, the young versus the less young. This is another way that you can use people creatively when you're photographing in the street. And again, because the Fuji cameras are so light, I can shoot at very slow shutter speeds, handheld. Because again, I don't like to carry equipment with me other than my camera and a few lenses. So I just put it in burst mode. I set it up to like a 30th of a second or sometimes an eighth. I just hold it really tight and then just burst. One of them is going to come out, most likely, right? So again, you know, this is a way of like creatively using the people that you have around you. So I try to shoot early in the morning also because I want to avoid people. But when I want to be with people, then I just go to the belly of the beast and just go like 42nd Street, for example. And you're going to get people there, most likely. So finally, one of the questions I think almost every photographer in the world gets asked is what kind of gear do you use? And as I mentioned, I'm a Fujifilm X photographer. And I shoot, but I've been shooting with Fuji actually, you know, I just recently became a Fujifilm X photographer, but I've been shooting with Fujifilm equipment for about 3 years now. And currently with the X Pro 2, before that I was shooting with the X-T1, and actually the dance series started with the X100S. So there are cameras that are I was a Canon shooter before, and I think we have all known now with the progression of mirrorless, you know, we all want less weight. So that's one of the reasons why I turned to mirrorless. And particularly Fuji, I like two things in particular. One was the image quality, and the other one is the style. I think a camera, it's something that you have with you all the time. And user experience is part of our experience with technology. So if it's something that I feel that I want to have with me all the time, then I'm more comfortable with it and I want to carry it. So that's my experience with Fujifilm. In terms of lenses, it's a toss-up between the 56. I shot more with the 1.2 normal, and then now the APD, and then the 90mm f2. And it's a toss-up between those two because I really like the compression that they both give. The 90 is great, again, as I was saying, because it's weather sealed, so I can go out in every situation and shoot. But I also like really the compression. But then the 1.2, the 56 1.2, just really melts that background, and but I can also add a little bit more story. So I usually turn to the 56 when I want to add more story to the frame, but still have like a really nice blurred background. The 16 and the 23 I use mostly when I'm shooting jumps because you can really exaggerate the perspective. So a lot of times, you know, those jumps look like they're super high and they're actually not really that high. Just I'm using a very wide angle and then I'm shooting from a very low angle so that it really looks higher. And then the 35 millimeter f2, but at 30, that's the one that I use the least. I just, for some reason, it's 50 millimeter equivalent, which is what a lot of people feel like a normal, but I'm not normal. So I don't shoot normal. So finally, thank you so much to all of you guys for being here.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.